When the Venetian ambassador Giovanni Michiel reported to the Doge in 1555 about the Edward VI impostor William Featherstone, he sarcastically remarked that, as is well known, this was not a novelty in England. Alluding to Perkin Warbeck, he wrote, "There was a similar impostor who represented himself as one of the sons of Edward IV, who had found recognition just like Featherstone now. He could only comment on the whole thing, shaking his head. What strange fancies prevail amongst these people?" In fact, Michiel took the event too lightly. His statement, being believed to be such, both in the country and here, he raised a tumult amongst the populace, leads to the idea that it was a minor unrest. However, the government of Queen Mary I took the whole thing so seriously that Featherstone, who is often called Constable, was questioned in the presence of the monarch. His head eventually landed on London Bridge. Mary's half-sister Elizabeth didn't know it then, but she too would have to deal with a fake Edward. His real name was Robert Blosse. The surname Mantell also often appears. In principle, it was similar to Featherstone. If Blosse had given up his claim, nothing would have happened to him. Instead, he followed up. He is said to have gained recognition as Edward VI, especially among women. Both cases and the continuing rumors that Edward is still alive tell us much about the difficulties of female rule in the Tudor period. But first things first. Few sources provide information about the Edward VI imposters. Both Mary I's and Elizabeth I's governments initially sought to suppress these incidents. From Mary's reign, the letter from the Venetian ambassador to the Doge is perhaps the closest thing we have to an official document on the matter. Additionally, there are two chronicle accounts from the period. These accounts come from contemporaries Henry Machin and Richard Grafton. Grafton's work, in particular, is not highly regarded for its historical accuracy, and Machin's credibility is also questionable, as he was once punished for spreading slanderous information about a preacher. Despite these issues, Machin, a Catholic, and Grafton, a Protestant, provide largely consistent reports. Grafton's account, however, contains more detailed information, making these two sources interesting to compare. For Blosse, the primary source available to us is a report by London's recorder William Fleetwood, who served as a legal advisor. Notably, Fleetwood was originally slated to become a judge, but Elizabeth ultimately chose not to appoint him. It remains unclear whether his report on Blosse influenced this decision by the Tudor Queen. Featherstone first declared himself to be Edward VI in February 1555, claiming that a supernatural power and a miraculous coincidence had saved him, though he did not elaborate further. At the time, Featherstone was about 18 years old, the son of a miller. For several years, he had served as a servant to Peter Mutas, a courtier at the royal courts of Henry VIII and Edward VI, making it plausible that he might have encountered the real Edward at some point. In May 1555, rumors circulated that Queen Mary had given birth to a son. Although these proved false, they spurred Featherstone to intensify his claims of being Edward. Around the same time, two men in Essex were detained for asserting that Edward was still alive, though their fate remains unknown. The government responded decisively. Featherstone was arrested in Kent and brought to Hampton Court, where he was interrogated by the Privy Council in the presence of the Queen. He reportedly acted like a lunatic fool, as all the sources consistently describe. However, historians writing 20 to 30 years later speculated that this behavior might have been a ploy to avoid punishment. Little substantial information emerged from his interrogation. Featherstone admitted that he was not Edward and claimed that the idea had not been his own, but had been suggested by others. The Privy Council was keen to learn who these instigators were, but Featherstone did not reveal any names. Tobias Hugg, in his writings on Featherstone, speculates that his former master, Mutus, may have been involved, though Mutus was not arrested. On May 22, 1555, Featherstone was publicly humiliated. He was paraded through Westminster wearing a fool's cap and a placard mocking him, flogged, and then imprisoned in Marshalsea Prison in Southwark. This prison later gained notoriety when Charles Dickens's father was imprisoned there, and it featured in one of Dickens's works. After his release, the poor idiot, as David Hume called him, was sent to the north. He might have faded into obscurity, much like Mary Bainton, who had impersonated Princess Mary I in 1533, had he remained silent. But Featherstone did not remain silent. He began to claim that Edward VI was still alive and that he had spoken to him, insisting that the king would return to reclaim his throne once he had enough support in England. This time, Featherstone's claims garnered more significant attention, which proved to be his undoing. He was arrested again, and this time there was no leniency. Featherstone was executed as a high traitor, and his head was impaled on London Bridge until it decomposed. Despite his tragic end, Featherstone's story may have taken on a romanticized life of its own. He is believed to have inspired the character of Tom Canty in Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper. Unlike Featherstone, however, Canty meets a much happier fate, becoming Edward's royal ward. In the years that followed, rumours persisted that Edward VI was still alive, though none were taken seriously, until 1572. At that time, a man named Robert Blosse, or possibly Robert Mantell, the name is uncertain, claimed that Edward was alive and residing in Flanders. Blosse, who was a yeoman and therefore had some proximity to the Queen, asserted, much like Featherstone before him, that the Tudor king was merely waiting to gather enough support to return. Blosse's background is somewhat murky. Some accounts describe him as a sailor. He made his claims during the turbulent period of the Ridolfi conspiracy. Interestingly, it is said that Blosse asked a legal scholar from Oxford whether making such a claim constituted high treason. The scholar reportedly assured him it did not. London's recorder, William Fleetwood, reached a similar conclusion in his report dated October 20th, 1572. Fleetwood argued that Blosse's actions did not amount to treason since he did not claim to be Edward himself, distinguishing him from Featherstone, who had committed high treason by pretending to be the king. As a result, Blosse was released. However, Blosse couldn't resist continuing his claims. By 1577 or 1578, he found himself imprisoned in Colchester Castle, but he garnered support from locals who helped him escape in July 1579. Now, Blosse went a step further and directly assumed Edward's identity. He also spread a rumour that Queen Elizabeth had secretly married Robert Dudley in 1564 and that the couple had 4 children. Blosse was eventually recaptured and sent to the notorious Newgate prison. In 1581, he was executed as a high traitor. His was the last significant case of someone impersonating Edward VI. Although Blosse did not receive as widespread support as Featherstone, he claimed that it was primarily women who believed him. Despite his execution, rumours that the Queen's half-brother was still alive continued to surface from time to time. Notably, both Edward VI's imposters emerged during critical moments in the reigns of the 2 Tudor queens. For Mary, the possibility of giving birth to a prince represented a chance to secure Catholic rule. Meanwhile, a conspiracy against Elizabeth questioned her legitimacy, threatening to replace her with a Catholic monarch. In both scenarios, the figure of Edward VI could have resolved the challenges faced by the queens. He had the strongest claim to the throne among Henry VIII's children, both by will and law. When it became clear that Mary would not bear a child and likely could not, the rumors of Edward's survival gained renewed traction. It's possible that those behind these rumors sought to prevent England from falling into Habsburg's hands, or to stop another woman, like Elizabeth, from ascending the throne. The situation with Elizabeth and Robert Blosse was similar. Elizabeth's reluctance to exclude Mary, Queen of Scots, from the line of succession left her vulnerable. These imposters represented targeted attacks on female rulers, an issue that seemed to persist throughout their reigns. In fact, it seems plausible that Featherstone, for example, had supporters behind him. The timing of his actions is too coincidental to be dismissed. Moreover, both imposters had ample opportunity to heed the lessons from the past. Blosse, in particular, had Featherstone's fate as a warning. These incidents highlight the extent to which some segments of society were uncomfortable with female rule, to the point where they were willing to support obvious pretenders. Unlike Richard of York, whom Perkin Warbeck claimed to be, there was no question that Edward VI was dead. Yet this fact did not deter those who clung to the hope of a male ruler. My members can find the script for this video in the channel's community tab. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to help my channel.